So this event hopefully gives us the opportunity to discuss certain topics that we think are important right now in the construction trade. So we've got Dr. Joel Callow from Beyond Carbon, who are based in Bicester. They're very passionate about the environment, and they like to work on projects that meet the environmental standards, the highest standards they can really. We at Callow have had the pleasure of doing some projects at Enefit and Passivhaus. The first one we started about 3 years ago. We didn't really know a huge amount about it. We kind of just learned on the go. But our last one, which is Fir Tree, I think it's on the top of the brochure, which was Passivhaus. Yeah, we kind of understood, kind of got the concept, the idea of what we're trying to achieve. You know, we see the importance that and benefit to the client and the environment, and yeah, so we want to create a sustainable future for now and for future generations. So if you could give Joel a warm welcome as he comes up to present. Thank you very much, Joel.
Thank you, Paul, and good morning, everybody. Okay, so I've got about 25 minutes to rattle through what is Passivhaus and why should we do it in the UK construction market. And there's lots of stuff to cover, so I'm going to be fairly fast. The dilemma maybe is, can we afford to do it? And if we can afford to do it, should we do it? And I'm going to go and bust some myths initially that will hopefully unpack the answers to those kinds of questions, and also talk into the challenges for architects of very high performance building design standards like Passivhaus. So without further ado, let's bust some myths together. I've got 5 myths. I'll give you 5 on screen, and I'm going to try and explain why each of these is a misconception about Passivhaus and what the truth is, hopefully a more positive truth than the myths. So we're going to do the doubts this morning. So number 1, is Passivhaus too expensive to really be a mainstream solution to the environment issues we face, the climate crisis, ecological crisis, and the like? Is it just simply impractically expensive or not? So number 1 myth. Well, if you read the 2019 Passivhaus Trust Report on cost, you might conclude, yes, actually, the Passivhaus standard, brilliant as it is, a global standard, probably the foremost and most difficult performance energy standard, this is operational energy, is too expensive to do in bulk en masse. The report concluded numbers in the region of around 4% once adopted at scale. This is 4% extra capital cost. And initially something like 10%. And if any of you had the pleasure of looking through the profit and loss figures for developments, that would probably kill quite a lot of developments, certainly in London and probably elsewhere as well. So 4% sounds like, oh great, we've got down to 4, but if that were true, then it would not be a widespread and adoptable standard, because we wouldn't be able to build the buildings we currently need to. Certainly 1.5 million homes coming our way in the next few years, fingers crossed. Thankfully, that 4% at the time was a prediction of what they thought a future number might look like, and it was far too high. So it's worth saying this applies, the larger scale the project, the lower the number. So if you build 500 homes, that number is probably sub-zero. If you build 1 home, then it's probably higher than 4%, and that person will be building a house because they want the best house for themselves. That's fine, that's a great investment. I still recommend it, but it won't be 0 cost, it will be a cost. So the bigger the better, and at scale, the number isn't 4%, it's almost certainly 0 or lower, so a cost saving. So bizarrely, Passivhaus might be cheaper to construct than not Passivhaus, depending on the context and scale of your project. Vis-a-vis Barratt Homes. So Barratt don't do things unless they can afford to. That's how you get to be a FTSE 100 successful house builder, and they have adopted Passivhaus certified en masse for every London project from this point onwards, starting with a project I'll show you in a moment. So if Barratt can do it at reasonable cost, then so can everybody else. Number 2, Passivhaus is just too hard. Now that's a fair comment. Passivhaus is hard. There are reasons why it is still the right thing to do. It's not too hard, but it is challenging. There are challenging areas around supply chain. So even if the main contractor says, yeah, I can do Passivhaus, they've still got to convince every single supply chain provider that relates to Passivhaus, particularly air tightness, thermal continuity, quality and so on, windows, the whole shebang. Each supply chain partner has to also come along for the journey, that's challenging. It's really hard. So it is hard. Is it too hard? No, not really. Our day job, my whole company, what we do is we deliver Passivhaus at almost every scale you can imagine. So we work with tier 1 contractors designing laboratories, we do multi-resi in London, we do everything else in between as well. And the truth of it is, every person we've worked with has ultimately agreed they can deliver Passivhaus, but they did find it hard the first time. So first project, really challenging, Paul's kind of said that already, worthwhile, but hard work, the learning experience. Project 2, Project 3, Project 4, it starts to roll very, very smoothly and people really enjoy doing it. So it's basically a quality standard, not an energy standard in effect. The energy outcome is because the quality is very high. So what you're really saying is, would I like to build quality buildings or not? Is it too hard to build quality? The answer is no. We're a really fantastic industry, and when we're set a challenge, we rise to it. So I would say, no, it's not too hard. It's hard enough to be worth the challenge and to do the job right, and not to give up and say, too difficult? No, of course not. We can do it. Okay, number 3, it's not needed. Why would we bother doing Passivhaus? And I would say, if it isn't needed, let's please not do it, because it is quite challenging and hard. I love it, I think it's a great standard, but the reason I love it is because I think it's necessary. So if I can convince you guys that we should be doing it, then I've done my job well today. So why do we need it? Well, there's probably 2 principal reasons, and they're both on screen here. Okay, first of all, I sometimes hear in the specialist built environment press, we've got operational energy all sorted out. Our buildings are low energy and fantastic. Part L's been pushing down on U values for years. It's all tickety-boo, low heating bills, etc., job done. I'm a bit worried about embodied carbon. Crikey, that concrete's high embodied carbon in my project. You know, that's my big concern. Operational carbon, it's history. We did that. That's all sorted. If that were true, I would happily resign my post on carbon and go and do something else with my life that was more worthwhile. It's not true at all. The exact opposite is true. Part L has been terrible for operational energy and is a really faulty energy standard. And the energy gap between what the likes of me say is going to happen when we do our energy calcs, or our SAP calcs, or whatever it is, and what actually happens when the homeowner or occupant of the building gets cracking with their heating and cooling and everything else, the gap is absolutely phenomenal. So far from having solved operational energy, it remains as big a problem as it ever was. And worse than that, as we try and decarbonise our country, now whatever your position is on net zero, we are heading there in some form as a nation, and hopefully as a planet too. If we have very wasteful buildings on our national grid, and then we insist to electrify them, which we ought to, the grid gets bigger and bigger and bigger, more and more expensive, and more high carbon to construct. More and more solar panels are required for the wasteful buildings we're constructing. So in a world where the national grid is not infinitely large, and we can't just switch on another power station to cover the load, in that world, we need our buildings to plug in at the lowest possible energy draw that they can achieve. So we are actually contributing to a national movement of energy security, energy independence, and zero carbon when we construct low energy buildings, and the opposite is also true. So you want to ask yourself, what I'm building and doing in my job, am I contributing to this future I'm imagining where we're secure and zero carbon, or am I detracting from it by building wasteful products that consume too much energy? Think gas guzzler versus hybrid eco-car or something of that kind. Okay, so it's very much needed. Second point, very quickly, climate resilience. And I'm going to come on to a bit more of this in the next couple of myths. We need our buildings to operate well regardless of what happens to our weather and our climate over the next few decades. Passivhaus is uniquely resilient to high and low temperatures. So heat waves, sorted. Cold snaps, also sorted. The inside of the building stays stable, comfortable, and safe for its occupants, regardless of what's going on outside of the building. So really critical point, climate resilience. Which brings me on to overheating. And now, if we don't design buildings that are capable of managing heat waves, we're going to have some nasty surprises in the coming years, because we've already had a really solid heat wave in 2022. That was the first time we got over 40 degrees in the UK in the history of humans, by the way. That's not in the last century or in the last 500 years. That's since there were humans that could ever have experienced those temperatures in Britain, there has not been a 40 degree summer that scientists are aware of. So first time in human history, 2022, 40 degrees. Now if that was a one-off, we can all breathe a sigh of relief, get back to business as usual, happy days. Unfortunately it wasn't, and we're finding rolling heat waves are going to come our way. In fact, indeed, this summer has been, well, not as bad as 2022, but definitely in the same direction. And on the continent in Europe, it's been at least as bad. So our buildings need to be heat wave resilient. Do passive houses overheat? This is an accusation I get levelled. The answer is no, and in fact the opposite is true. If you build a passive house correctly, it will always be cooler and more comfortable in a heat wave than the building next door that is not passive house. You can do it badly, probably. I mean, with a bit of effort, you could do a bad passive house, but you shouldn't need to, and if you don't, you'll get a resilient building that stays the right temperature. So far from being a problem for heat waves, it is a solution to heat waves. And the stuff we're doing in London, which I'll come on to in a moment, is one of the reasons we're doing that is because London is the hottest part of the UK due to the heat island effect, and so the buildings there need to be even more resilient than they might be in, say, the Oxfordshire countryside. It still matters here, but it matters even more in London. Okay, final one, airtightness. Those of you involved, if you've ever been on the tools or are in construction itself as opposed to the design side of all of this, will be saying, yeah, that's all very well and good, Joel, but I know about Passive House, I know that. It has this crazy, crazy difficult airtightness standard that's 5 times worse than building regs. Are you really telling me we can deliver that on every project? And the answer is yes, I am telling you that we can. So airtightness is rightly recognised as a significant jump up. So in some of the other areas, Passive House is a tweak or a tune or a bit of an improvement on the normal. On airtightness, it is a step change better. So it is 5 to 10 times more airtight than a typical UK building. However, if you design and construct for airtightness, as opposed to treating it as an add-on that you sort of ignore because it's quite easy, funnily enough, you can improve the airtightness by a factor of 10 quite comfortably. And there are some innovations that we're seeing in the market today that are making that step change, that tenfold step change, somewhat less painful and more achievable. So again, it comes down to quality. Airtightness is simply how big are the holes in your building. So ask yourself, how many holes would I like? And the answer ought to be none, okay? We don't say about water tightness, well, let's try and make it relatively watertight. But if there's a bit of leakage in heavy rain, that's okay. No, we say it is 100% watertight. There will be no leaks under any circumstances. So if we can do that for water tightness, the air tightness is simply the same idea but applied to all 3 dimensions in the building as opposed to just the roof surface. So we don't compromise on issues of human health and well-being. We don't allow leaks to take place. Air tightness is the same. Really airtight buildings with proper ventilation are healthier and happier for the occupants with lower energy bills, lower levels of atmospheric pollutants inside the home, let's say, next to a busy road in London with PM 2.5s being emitted by the car tyres as they pass, even the EVs as well as the petrol engine cars. So how are we going to stop that? Well, we make the building very airtight and then we filter and ventilate carefully inside so that the person inside is not having an accumulation of rubber particulates causing them cancer in their lungs. They are breathing filtered, healthy air. But if we don't do that, they will be breathing those things. And that isn't just London either, that is also the Oxfordshire countryside. So we want healthy, happy humans, we need to build better, and airtightness is part of that. So again, quality is the key metric here. Okay, I'm going to do 3 or 4 slides on what is Passive House, having busted the myths, hopefully, and then I'll give you some project examples, and then we'll wrap up my part and move on to the next parts of the morning. So this is what a project team looks like for a UK construction project in the case where it's not Passive House. So all the usual suspects, critical professional people doing great jobs of what they're doing in their professional lives, and together delivering complex building projects in the UK. That's what happens without Passive House. Let me swap to the next slide, and I'll go back again in a minute as well. That's what it looks like when it's Passive House. You've got 3 new shiny yellow people. They're only yellow because Beyond Carpenter's colour is yellow, by the way. They can be any colour you want. But I like yellow. 3 new people are in the mix. So let's just go back. Business as usual. Go forward. Passive House, and you've got 3 new yellow folk. And what you've got there is a whole load of people who are fixated, I would go as far as to say fanatical about quality. Okay? I employ and work with a great team of quality fanatics, super nerds, if you like, whose job it is to fixate on the tiny details of quality that aggregate into a much, much, much better building at the end of the day, and to fight for those details through the long and slow and laborious process of design and construction, so that at the end, the client gets exactly the thing they wanted at the start, which was a high quality building. Those 3 people, so that's the Passive House consultant, the Passive House certifier, third party verifier of what's going on, and then finally beyond that, the Passive House Institute, who are the guardians of this high performance standard, All three of those work in a hierarchy. The consultant is the day-to-day person, that's my typical job on the project. My co-director Chris is a certifier. Our job is to make sure that the rest of the team have every piece of information, wisdom, technical knowledge and everything else they need to deliver a better quality building. I do that every day, all day, from RIBA stage 1 to 7+ and onwards, and every part in between. The certifier's job is to make sure that I do my job right so that the team has everything they need. So they're a verifier and a checker, and then finally behind all that, the Institute will from time to time vet and check what we're doing to make sure we're not pulling the wool. So quality assurance requires levels of disclosure and honesty and transparency. And the only way to really get that is third-party reporting. If we say we've done something but nobody checks, from time to time we'll cut corners because it's a busy industry, margins are tight, we're all under pressure. It would be naive to imagine we're going to deliver brilliant quality buildings without anybody ever checking us. Building control is supposed to perform that function, though, so arguably it doesn't. So the certifier is simply there to ensure we do the quality job we said we would do, and then sign it off as that quality job. If you do the quality job, there's nothing to be feared there. Why would you fear being checked by a person who's telling you you did the job you said you would do, well done, and gives you a big thumbs up and a certificate at the end? So certification, for me, is vital if we're going to get the quality levels dramatically upwards. Tenfold increase in air tightness, and then marginal tweaks everywhere else. 6 principles, I think. Passivhaus has 5 on the website, we've added a 6th. So super airtight buildings, fine. Windows are high performance. In the UK, that means triple glazing and high performing frames as well. Ventilation is heat recovered in the winter. In the summer, it's cool recovered if the building has cooling, or it's opening windows if not. In building fabric, so the fabric first idea, we are minimising or removing thermal bridges. That's done carefully, not to cost extra money, but it is vital. So Part L is beginning to measure this a little, but often completely overlooks it. And when we get brought into, quote unquote, Passivhaus, a project that hasn't been designed this way, we are shocked often by the extent of the thermal bridging. It's easy peasy in a sense to get it right, as long as there's somebody in the room whose job it is to get it right and to fight for it step by step by step by step. If there's nobody there doing that, we default back to kind of medium to low performance detailing. It's not that hard to change, but you've got to want to and have the expertise in the room to do it. Insulation, you might be worried that we're talking about walls, yay thick with meters of insulation. Thankfully we're not in most cases, and I'll come on to a bit more of that in a moment. And then finally, primary energy, the total energy consumed by the building. Again, the regulation only measures regulated energy and ignores everything else. So typically on a non-domestic building, it ignores 2/3 of the energy loads and goes, oh, I hope those work out for you, and it focuses on just 1/3 of them. Passivhaus says, no, it doesn't matter what the load is. If it comes in through the meter, it's a part of the energy load, and we need to measure it and minimise it. Okay, 3 planks to Passivhaus, if you like. Really, really challenging performance standards. So I've said a lot about that already. A really clever design methodology and brilliant tools, so that if you have the fortunate experience to have a Passivhaus consultant in your team and you're delivering a Passivhaus project, as per my yellow chart a moment ago, that team should have great tools to deliver a great project. So you're not left out in the cold hoping for the best. You've got great tools to see you through the design and the construction processes. And then finally, quality, quality, quality. On site, the construction quality has to match and deliver the design quality as well. And the designers should have done their job so well that the construction is actually easier than it would have been before. Right, we're almost there, folks. And I'll do my project experience, then we'll pass on. Okay, so this one I'm going to just briefly mention. Passivhaus is actually 3 standards in one. So premium plus classic. Generally, when we say the word Passivhaus, we mean Passivhaus Classic. We just don't say the classic bit afterwards. You can see the numbers on screen. Very low energy demand, very low air leakage rates through the building, and then some other standards around energy, acoustics, and overheating as well. So it's a comfort and a quality standard that happens to also deliver very low energy. Okay, this is a critical slide because it tells you about the scale of Passivhaus and why it costs less for larger buildings. So if you have a building on the left-hand side of my chart here, so a form factor, which is the measure of the building envelope area to the useful floor area, of around the 0.8 to 1.8, there's a 1 to 2-ish. In other words, a very compact building, generally a larger project, a multi-resi, multi-story building, or a larger project, you will find Passivhaus extremely cost-effective if it's designed and delivered well. If you're in the middle, so we're now talking kind of terraced housing or equivalent archetypes of that sort, it might still be quite cost effective, but it's beginning to get a bit more challenging. And if you're at the other end, so this is detached houses or smaller houses, it's still doable, but it gets more challenging to achieve the energy performance and quality that are asked of us for Passivhaus. So I want to be completely honest about that. The scale of the project is the single biggest determinant of its overcost for Passivhaus. And the second factor is how well designed the project was. The better designed, the lower the overcost. Right, I'm going to quickly rattle through for you what we're doing in London for apartments, and then we'll see how that might spin out to other building types as well. So we've got our 3 planks here, which are improved fabric performance, window optimization, and decentralized heat, so exhaust air heat pumps. I'll quickly run through those one at a time for you. So first of all, improved building fabric. In London, you'll see the numbers on screen there are not actually more onerous than Part L. In fact, in some cases they are less onerous, less challenging than Part L. In particular, wall U values are 100 ml of mineral wool in the cavity and another 100 in the SFS layer, so kind of 150 equivalent, I suppose, in a cavity wall. So not excessive, not vastly more, if any more, than you would have done for regs compliance. But we have absolutely hammered the thermal bridging, driven down the air tightness, and improved the windows and ventilation as we go along. So what we've done is we've targeted the things that matter, and we've left the things that are already kind of okay-ish, so wall U values, where they needed to be. It's very pragmatic. It's not some kind of idealism that says, no matter what we do, we're going to blast it out of the park. No, you say, this is our target. We will spend money up to hitting the target. We will not spend money beyond that. That's pointless. That's a pointless waste for everybody. We've got such a great standard to work to. You don't spend beyond target, you spend to it. Okay, so that's fabric. Next, heat pump in a box. So this would also work on small individual resi projects, but not larger ones. And it works a treat in multi-resi apartments. So rather than a big heat pump on the roof, a lot of pipework scattering its way down to a large project, you put a single box, one in each apartment. Each person has their own, effectively, their own boiler, if you like. You know, back in the good old days of having your own heating system, and they control the electricity that's supplied to that system, and it provides their heating, cooling, ventilation, and hot water in a single box. It's considerably cheaper than centralised systems, as well as lower carbon in every metric. And then finally, this is the critical one for London, but it would also apply to non-London, less dense projects as well, window optimisations. So we typically find that windows are designed more for aesthetic reasons than they are for functional reasons. As a consequence, heating systems are larger, cooling systems are larger, carbon emissions are higher, and so on and so on. In high performance buildings, windows are the single most important design parameter, and if they're done well, they will save money and drive down the cost and size of systems. If they're done badly, they may look great, in fact they often do, they will not perform great, and actually the resident or occupant will not thank you later for high heating bills, cooling bills, or poor thermal comfort that results from larger windows that weren't sized correctly and orientated correctly. Right on screen now is a high density London project. It's one of our largest ones actually. I think it's a 1,500 home scheme, so we're not suggesting this is happening every day of the week for most folk, but what we spend time learning and doing on projects of this scale trickles down into the other scales of projects as well. And this project critically was optimised for all those 3 things I just described at the same time with this software system you're seeing on screen. And what came out of that was this sort of idea where the team gets this macro set of solutions. So I think there's 1,134 different ways of tackling the problem. And then together as a team, we navigated our way through, using it as a map, to find the single best solution that was lowest cost, highest quality, most straightforward to deliver on site, and so on and so on and so on. So by having all the options up front, you get to pick your favourite as a team, and then you build it out, and you experience fewer problems because you've made the right choices earlier on in the project. I'm going to jump straight through to the one that you're probably most interested in, which is Barratt's announcement of recent times. So they're the first, but not the only, large-scale developer to announce Passivhaus as a standard. And there's 2 or 3 other developers, one in Northern Ireland and a couple of others in London, that are either about to announce or are planning how they will announce the use of Passivhaus at scale. Barratt got through the gates first, as it were. They announced in April. It was in the Times as an article. Every London apartment built by Barratt from this point onwards will be certified to the Passivhaus Classic standard. And the way they've done that is how I just described it to you. There's 3 circles inside the circle. Each of those is optimised absolutely to the absolute nth degree, and they leave no stone unturned to get it exactly right. So it's not 98% right, it is 100% optimum. no waste anywhere in the system from an energy, daylight, climate resilience and energy perspective. You all that together, you strike through the middle of the bullseye, you don't waste anything anywhere, and as a consequence you can build these better buildings, more climate resilient, lower energy, for the same money or even less money than you would have spent on a poorer, lower quality product. So it's a very much a win-win for the likes of Barratt, and of course for the residents who inherit or purchase or rent these incredible houses that are comfortable, quiet, filtered air, healthy, happy homes, or indeed non-homes as well. So win-win all round, and hats off to Barratt for taking a brave step, albeit based on great science, data and design that they had thoroughly vetted. So this wasn't on a whim, it took them several years to make this decision, and it was based on really excellent design that they knew they could see through and deliver. And really what we found was, by focusing on quality, with costs limitations at every step, we ended up driving through better quality at lower cost and a better outcome as well. So I think my concluding point really is that what we've learned from multi-resi in London, we can then send those lessons out into the rest of the industry as well and help folk to deliver better buildings than they currently feel they can afford to do, but at lower cost than they thought they could do. Thank you.
One question. On Barratt's construction quality, how have they approached the supply chain issues of how it's traditionally done in house building, or just getting homes for the lowest price?
That's a great question. So it's about how have Barratt dealt with the supply chain issue of selecting on lowest price. They've done a couple of things actually, and they're also in the process of doing more as well. So one thing that they very publicly and happily declare is they're working really hard on education. So they are building out education classrooms, sort of site classrooms that they'll drop onto every site that have different strands for different supply chain members. So for example, we mentioned already that airtightness is a really big jump up compared to some of the other smaller tweaks. So they've got a whole education program devoted to supply chain partners that relate to airtightness. So if you go anywhere near the airtight line of a building that they're working on site, you will have passed through their airtightness cabin, if you like, and been trained in how your trade and your tools affect the overall building airtightness and how to do that in a way that works. So it's not rocket science. We've been vetting quality on Barratt sites for a couple of years, as I said, and you find things like ductwork comes to the airtight line, and on a non-Passivhaus project, it doesn't really matter how airtight it is, because 3 or 4 is easy peasy, and so they just sort of terminate it at the airtight line and just cut a hole in the fabric of the breather membrane. Leave it at that, and it's kind of good enough, that'll do. And we were like, well, if you want Passivhaus, you're going to have to seal that duct to the airtight line, so here's a little grommet, you just take it on here like that, pitch bash bosh, and then you slide the duct through this lovely piece of rubber seal. It's a single component, it's not particularly expensive, it's actually quicker than the way they were attaching it previously, and instead of it leaking air out round the duct through the breather membrane, it's now tightly sealed and you've maintained the integrity of the line. So that means the duct installer has to pass through the classroom, discover what that grommet looks like, realise it's pretty straightforward for them, it's a minor tweak to how they normally operate their installation, and then you just have to manage the quality of that as you go across the site. That's just one of hundreds of things they're doing, but basically it's education, tweaking how we do things to achieve marginal gains 1,000 times over, all of which add up to these really significant changes we see when we do the whole thing really, really well. So education, I think. Really minimum cost, that's a challenging one. I don't think developers can compete with each other without fighting for minimum cost. So it's about how you achieve minimum cost with sufficient quality to deliver the outcomes you're after.
Just following on from that, do you envisage a time, a bit like the old CPS where the cars used to be, skill sets and things, do you envisage it as a time when there is going to be a requirement for a skill card to ensure that Passivhaus is actually met?
Yes, I do. I mean, there is already such a thing. It's just not widely adhered to. So there is a contractor's Passivhaus course. It's a 2-day hands-on sort of tools type course rather than the theoretical stuff you do in the 2-week designer course. I mean, both are great. So you could easily say to your site team, well, you have to have the Passivhaus tradesperson qualification in order to work on this site. In practice, that's quite hard to do because of all the supply chain complexity and partners and so on. So what main contractors tend to do is put 2 or 3 critical members of their team through the Passivhaus designer and tradesperson courses, which kind of complement each other to some degree, and they become the champions for Passivhaus on site, and that means they can then pass on some of the education to critical supply chain members and so on. So it's impractical to have 150 different workforce members all passing the same course, at least today. Give it 10 years, maybe that would be completely practical. But for today, what we end up doing is having champions who've got the full training package, passing smaller parts of training down through the chain of command.
Because houses, the majority of people live in this kind of buildings. How could we tackle that?
Great, thank you. So for the live stream again, that's around can we do Passivhaus on existing buildings and perhaps particularly existing houses, and with the common archetypes in the UK of semi-detached and detached, is that feasible? I'll say two things. So first of all, no, it's not feasible, and secondly, yes, it is. The no is if you were to try and certify every house in Britain to the NFIT standard, which is the Passivhaus retrofit standard, it would cost a fortune. You'd end up with some fabulous housing, and crikey, I would jump into an NFIT house any day of the week versus something else that wasn't as good, because it would have all the benefits of a new build Passivhaus, really, or close to it. The actual cost of doing that would be phenomenal. I have no idea how many trillions it is, but it'd be a lot. And so practically, we're going to have to do something a little bit more balanced than that. That's the kind of gold standard, and it's not technically unfeasible, it's financially or commercially non-feasible to pay for that. So we have to find a solution somewhere in the middle, I think. Sometimes we'll get a chance to really do deep retrofit down even to the NFIT standard and certify. Often we will not, and the likes of Nigel Banks at Octopus and others would say fabric fifth, not fabric first. We start with heat pumps, we drive down carbon emissions by well-designed, well-engineered heat pump systems, and it's a kind of regrettable reality of the commercial situation we face with 26 million homes, however many it is. We haven't got the time or the money to NFIT every single one, so we have to do things slightly more quickly.
Thanks, John. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm just going to ask Sam to come up to the stage, and he's just going to give a quick talk about who he represents, why he's here, and if you'd like to give Sam a warm welcome. So Sam Tuck from Realities UK.
My name's Sam Tuck. I'm the technical sales manager for Blauberg UK. Very briefly about who we are and what we do. So we're a European, German headquartered manufacturer of ventilation products. We manufacture everything from a standard 100mm bathroom fan all the way up to very large ventilation units, air handling units and commercial NVHR units. So our headquarters is over in Munich. This is a bit of a boring bit, so I'll rattle through it. There's loads of us all over the globe. Importantly, we're 50 guys and girls up in Leicester, where we have full design, specification, distribution and a small amount of manufacturing as well. So we're very well equipped for the UK market to provide you with everything from your basic, I need a bathroom fan please, all the way up to I have a sports centre, a swimming pool, that type of situation, and I need to ventilate it. Next slide. So, basic resi, a lot of you will be very familiar with this type of project, this type of product. So this is a standard residential NVHR unit, nothing out of the ordinary, great spec on the unit. Importantly, and probably for you guys to know, what we offer as a manufacturer is every part of the ventilation system that you see. So you can come to us, we will provide you with a baseline specification, quotation, all the way up to a full design for your property. That includes the NVHR unit, insulated ducting, non-insulated ducting, the ducting that runs out through to each and every one of your rooms, both branch, which a lot of the guys that will deal with Passivhaus on a daily basis will say, I only install branch because I can guarantee my system performance. We can also guarantee that system performance with a radial system. So the radial system is the green ducting that you see there, clipped up and runs from distribution boxes off of the main system. So very much like an underfloor heating manifold, you've got a ventilation duct, manifold and system, providing continual fresh air as well as continually extracting and recovering that heat as well. This is a live project about 3 miles from our Leicester HQ, which was, I'm going to keep my 2 outside walls, I'm going to completely disassemble the roof and reassemble it exactly as it is, just to meet planning. And it was a full, entire retrofit, including underfloor, heat pumps, increased insulation, ventilation, the works. So this was actually done to the LETI standard and achieved it absolutely no issue. Other bits and bobs that we do, so we do commercial NVHR units, so this may be boring to some, may be interesting to others. So on the right hand side of the screen we've got a project which was a change of use up in Newcastle. This was an old BT Telecoms block of offices. They turned it into 242 apartments. That got a ceiling mounted NVHR unit, and then on the left hand side a complete change from an old malting house in Burton-upon-Trent, so home of the brewers, to offices. So that got a full windows and doors, internal insulation, internal air tightness, and ventilation upgrade. The challenges on both were, well, potentially relatively obvious. Change of use, minimum ceiling voids because nothing's designed for modern day services. So that got one of our compact NVHR units, centrally located in each apartment, allowing full control for each apartment, which is ventilation rate and temperature. That also combated the issues of overheating that was prevalent on some of the apartments due to the orientation of the building. So that was all covered. So that actually across 3 floors took on our flat pack NVHR units. So we offer our commercial products IKEA style, for want of a better phrase. So whatever specification is required for that project, we'll deliver it to you on site, and it literally gets assembled within a day to 2 days max. So super flexible, and you're able to hit your ventilation requirements, along with offering obviously heat recovery as well. And really that's basically it for me. In terms of a manufacturer here supporting today, this is exactly the type of event we like to do, because we get to speak directly to you guys, introduce the brand to you. A lot of you won't be familiar with Blauberg, and that's completely normal. We've been in the UK since 2011, so we are still relatively the new guys, but please rest assured we have been around since 1952, albeit in Germany. So completely useless to everybody in the room. However, we are the team up in Leicester ready to help you out with any of your ventilation requirements. So that's me. Thanks very much.
Hello. We're Q2. We'll talk you a little bit about some pitfalls on different building contracts, with a bit of a focus on JCT. I'm Ben Walpole, chartered surveyor. Got various credentials to talk about contracts. Got a master's in construction law, did a bit of expert witness work, and Dave and I work on various projects, setting up contracts and operating them.
Morning everyone, I'm Dave Buxton, and like Ben, I'm also a chartered quantity surveyor and been client side for about 6 years now. For 25 years prior to that, I worked in the Tier 1 sector as a contractor's QS, and I guess that makes me living proof that you can teach old dogs new tricks. So we're going to run through a few things this morning about JCT, starting with common forms of contract based on the Contracts in Use survey, and for those in the room we'll be asking for some audience participation just to gauge your views on it. Moving on to then common pitfalls that we've experienced with both setting up and operating the contract. We'll then spend a moment or two talking about completing contracts and what to do in the event of completion or non-completion. A quick summary of what we've discussed before handing the floor back to you for Q&A.
So we wanted to sort of just gauge everyone's opinions on contracts. So we looked at, it's a few years old now, but they don't change very often. But this is the RIBA Contracts in Use survey in 2022. and we're just going to go through a few things on the most commonly used contracts, different tendering strategies, single stage, two stage, different procurement strategies, design and build and traditional, where all the design is done by the contractor, or whether it's all, all the responsibilities stays with the employer, or obviously there's a bit of a hybrid sometimes. And the pricing mechanisms, traditional lump sum contracts, remeasurable contracts, filter quantities, and sort of the market preference for different ones. I've looked at these contracts, and RICS used to do a similar version, and JCT has always been dominant. NEC rising in popularity, supposed to be a more collaborative form of contract, got mandated on lots of public sector projects. RIBA still have their building contracts which are used, but yeah, JCT is by far the most dominant. Generally, because it's so well established, has been around since 1931. It was actually formed by a consortium of architects originally, and it's the most well known by consultants, contractors. It's also been most tested in court, so lots of JCT contracts in court means lots of clauses have been tested. There's lots of definitions on clauses which people understand.
Okay, moving on to preferred tendering strategies, and again, this is based on contracts and use survey, but I'm also keen to understand what you're working with. So we're just focusing on single stage, two stage, or a one-on-one negotiation. So can I have a show of hands for whose preference is single stage tendering? Two stage? What about one-on-one direct negotiation? Okay, interesting. So our survey said single stage is still the most preferred, with employers still wanting to get that competition out there, promote the competitive edge. Although interestingly, as you can see, two stage and one-on-one negotiation are pretty much neck and neck now to promote that collaborative view. And certainly, if you tick the right option, supplementary box in the JCT, you should be working more collaborative anyway.
So what is the most frequently used pricing structure? So historically, bill of quantities, spec and drawings, cost plus. And what we mean by bill of quantities is a bill that is remeasurable. So it's not a fixed lump sum. Spec and drawings would be, the contractor's got a price for the spec and drawings, and whatever's on the spec and drawings is included. And obviously cost plus, which is a progressive costing exercise. So fixed price lump sum, by far the preferred route. And again, interesting that lots of negotiation and preferences in the room, but cost certainty seems to drive lots of the survey results. So fixed price lump sums, by far the most used.
Moving on then to most frequently used procurement method, be that a traditional or a design and build scenario. So show of hands please for traditional procurement method. And then same for D&B. Depending on whether you view CDP with traditional there, you'd end up with a 56% sway to a traditional form of procurements as opposed to 40% for 34% for D&B and 40% for that. So certainly experience has shown that you don't necessarily need to keep traditional contracts to smaller value projects. I myself am looking at two traditional schemes at the moment. One is a £3.3 million house refurb in Kensington with M&E and bizarrely staircases as CDP. It's going quite well. Everybody's working together collaboratively. It was a single stage negotiation. Contractor, professional team in certain places have changed, including us. We were brought in to conclude the negotiations. We weren't there at the beginning, but it's running through, and also come to the end of a £5.6 million office refurb in central Winchester. That looked pretty straightforward as a traditional, and then the tenant turned up, and that derail things slightly, but with a 16-week AOT, the contractor will finish in about 14 weeks' time, providing we get some mains power. So it can be done either way, and that's a good example of one that could have been a DMB or a traditional, but we opted for the former, and it seems to have been well received all around.
The interesting thing is, purely traditional contracts, I think, are on the decline. You know, when we talk about traditional contracts, they usually do include contracted design portions, so there are always some discrete elements, often M&E, but it could be, you know, waterproofing or, say, staircases or balustrades that you want contracted design. Surveys, just to show some trends, still a JCT bias. Like NEC was favour of the month for very big projects and engineering projects, but even on some projects and clients where they were inclined to NEC, people seem to be shifting back a little bit. So JCT is still very much the front runner, and most of the procurement processes are cost driven. The RIBA survey, sort of, a lot of the focus was about collaboration, and the question was, you know, are we seeing more collaboration in contracts? But you'll see, you know, cost driven procurement is still very much at the forefront of sort of clients' minds.
Moving on to setting up the contract and the traps and pitfalls to avoid. So we put this slide up with these bullet points based on our experience and sort of reflecting on things that we've seen good, but something mostly bad. So hence why we're flagging them as pitfalls, really. And to start with, the articles and recitals front of the JCT is the thing to get absolutely spot on correct to avoid problems later down the line. Recognising the importance of the roles, certainly. The contract administrator and the QS can be one and the same. They could be different people, but please don't put that TBC character in there, because you'll soon get frustrated when they don't actually do anything for you. We found that. Commencement and completion dates, again, this needs to be fairly well nailed down. Don't put an arbitrary date in. If you're not sure when the job's going to start, or the client stalls for whatever reason, just don't put the dates in the contract, because straight away that opens up the door for extensions. It's not a place you want to be on the back foot with the client on day one. Sectional completions, if they apply, put them in. The employer may want to take something later on, but if you haven't put the provision in there, it's just a more difficult negotiation. You can get around it with partial possession, but we don't always recommend that.
You see that a lot with phased programs, that there's lots of detail about phasing, but actually nothing is put in the contract with sectional completion. So in theory, unless you go through partial possession, you haven't defined that a section is going to be handed over in advance, and that's now going to be occupied by the employer. So yeah, phased programs really need to think about sectional completions. That gives different dates, and it sometimes with the phase, you know, a different section can't start until the previous section might have completed. So it's a bit of thought to go in on that.
Indeed. The other big ticket item really on the list is insurances, particularly if you're working in an existing building, ensuring that you have a joint owners policy in place with the employer and contractor. You don't want to find yourself in the position I found myself in autumn of 2000, working on a job in Bristol. Big storm one weekend, blew the temporary roof off a part of the building that was being constructed. It just also happened to be where the main electrical panel was. So there was a twofold problem there. There was the neighbours who weren't particularly impressed with fishing bits of scaffold out of their front garden over the course of the weekend, and we had a very awkward set of conversations with them on the Monday morning, and of course then going to the client saying we need to claim for your insurance because of this, it's a storm, it's your building, it's your risk. And then the client turned around saying, I'm not insured, I thought that was contractor's risk policy. So please double check with the employer before setting up the contract that they have actually got insurance in place. Damages as well, that needs to be in conjunction conversations with the employer to make sure that you have a pre-estimate of loss there. It's not down to you as the contract drafter to come up with a figure for that. Again, we've had experiences of where former colleagues have put numbers in, thinking that they're doing the right thing, to find out later on whether they need to levy the damages, and the client's looking at their actual losses and there isn't enough in there to cover. Now, it has to be a pre-estimate of loss. That could be anything from prolonged insurance charges, finance charges, rent on other premises, and other things besides. But providing you've got something scientific there that if you were challenged you could justify it, then that's perfectly acceptable. Moving on, when setting up the contracts, again, it's just a sanity check on who are you in contract with. Make sure you've got the registered address of the right company, particularly if it's a group of companies. Just that secondary check at Companies House, that may seem obvious, but we've seen it a couple of times where the regional office has gone in instead of the registered office, which is a problem later on when, if you need to serve a notice. And then again, making sure that the contractor design portions are defined, particularly when you think about recital 2. If you want a contractor to design a particular piece of work, it does need to be described pretty much exactly. Ben and I found ourselves on a job 5 years ago where there was lots of inferred reference to contractor design. The employer thought the contractor was designing the entire timber frame for this block of houses and flats that we were doing in the middle of Croydon. When we checked the contracts, there was no reference whatsoever. It was all inferred because it was discussed off the record. It hadn't been reported into the contract, so the employer bore the cost of every single change and the delays that came with it.
On when a contract's put together, obviously the JCT is a standard form, and all the forms, they're standard forms of contract, which the contract drafters have tried to get a balanced measure of risk between the employer and the contractor. But there are schedules of amendments often needed, usually driven by the employer, but occasionally contractors might request amendments too. Obviously they are legally changing the details of the clauses, so really need to be drafted by solicitors, but also needs to be incorporated into the contract properly. So sometimes you might have a schedule of amendments, but if it's not incorporated into the JCT, essentially you need to add an extra article explaining the incorporation, make sure the amendments are sort of also signed, then they might not be binding. So it's an important provision if there are schedules of amendments, but one, they're drafted properly, and two, they are incorporated into the contract. Also wanted to talk about the principle of the entire agreement. So the entire agreement clause is essentially anything that went before the contract doesn't really exist. The contract is the entire agreement, and we regularly have this on projects where there were discussions previously, or in a claim scenario, something that was discussed informally or even formally. If it doesn't make its way into the contract, unfortunately, it doesn't exist. So that's it's really important. All those pre-contract discussions make their way into, even the tender query process. When you go out to tender, contractors might ask a query, it's answered. Does that then get reflected into the final contract documents? So yeah, the purpose of entire agreement is quite important to understand.
Moving on to similar pitfalls when it comes to operating the contract. The first one we started with there is the notice provisions and the timescales that go with it. So as the recipient CAs, you need to be notified by the contractors forthwith when things become reasonably apparent, so that gives you a chance to mitigate any problems. For example, materials that are discontinued partway through, or there's another issue with sign-offs of something. You don't want to find yourself in a position where the program's been resequenced without your input or views to try and get around the problem, to then be told 6 months later, oh, we had a problem back there, here's our notification of delay. It's too late, it can't happen. The JCTs have a design submission procedure. We don't see that getting used quite a lot, but it is there for good reason. It has the ABC comment structure, which I'm sure everybody's familiar with. We see it more, the M&E consultants tend to follow that more, but it's there for good reason. It's there for your use, and yeah, we do encourage that you use it. It gives a 5 to 14 day period for response on both sides. I'm sure you've all been party to things just being thrown over on email, and you're asked to approve it there and then, which is great if you're able to respond proactively. But if you're on holiday or busy, all of a sudden you've fallen foul of the design submission procedure without realising it because it wasn't being followed properly. So our advice is don't allow it to happen in the first place. Extensions of time, again with JCT, it's not a case of one size fits all. The design build form is slightly different to the intermediate form, and the intermediate form is the one we see more of, and that gives you 8 weeks from receipt of, no, the design and build form, beg your pardon, gives you 8 weeks from receipt of information to review and assess, whereas the intermediate form is 12 weeks, and I believe, Ben, you said to me the other day that the intermediate guide has a slightly different view on life on that one.
The assessing extensions of time have always been, you should do it as soon as you can, but interestingly, JCT do in their guide, the reason it's 12 weeks from PC is they think it's helpful sometimes to see how delays plan out. It's quite hard to see when there's lots of moving parts, and so it's a bit contradictory because JCT does say it should be done as soon as reasonably practicable, or exactly the wording, but also says it can be 12 weeks from PC. It doesn't give a lot of certainty for clients and contractors. So, if a delay is clear, obviously extension of time should be granted, but sometimes you need some time to assess it thoroughly and see how events come into play.
Thank you. So when assessing your extension time applications, then there must be clear relevance to relevant events which award time, and if done properly there may also be reference to relevant matters which give money. As an awarder, you can award one or the other, and often both, depending on the circumstances, which naturally, if you've got money, that opens the door to loss and expense, and if it's being done properly, the intermediate form, again, just sticking with that by way of example in particular, says that you have to be given monthly updates by the contractor, and there should be also an ascertainment period with a 14-day update given to you thereafter. That's quite important, rather than just the wait and see approach. It should always be kept abreast, which also helps inform the employer of where that's going in the event that it becomes a bit prolonged.
So the final part was sort of completing the contract, and so there's lots of process at the end, and really to say that it doesn't finish at practical completion. So obviously at practical completion, well, prior to practical completion there can be non-completion, so where the contractor doesn't finish by the completion date, whether that's the original completion date or an adjusted completion date from an extension of time, there's a requirement to issue a notice of non-completion. That can also be cancelled out by a subsequent extension of time, and obviously if there is non-completion and the client is inclined to deduct damages, there's a process there which is quite complicated in terms of notices of intention to deduct damages and then confirming that damages will be deducted. The final account procedure happens after PC. Obviously, it's great when you can get to PC with a final account agreed, and obviously that's what everyone should strive for. But there is actually a 6-month period following practical completion for the contractor to issue details of the final account, and then a further 3 months for the contract administrator to assess that final account. So you reach PC, you may have outstanding extensions of time to deal with. You could then also have 9 months of final accounting, and then you get onto the defects process. So the rectification period used to be called the defects liability period, usually 6 or 12 months. You've also got that period where latent defects might come to light that need to be addressed by the contractor, and there's a process right at the end and if defects haven't been made good by at the end of that period, they could be deducted in the final account. And that paves the way for the final certificate. So the final certificate is issued at the end of the rectification period, and all those things need to be resolved: extensions of time, final account, defects, and the final certificate becomes conclusive. And there's really only one recourse left, and that is within 28 days of the final certificate. That's adjudication or dispute can be raised.
And just to round off then with a quick summary of the pitfalls. So make sure to begin with you select the right contract that meets the needs of the client and the specifics of the project. Ensure that you have the correct people in the correct roles. Remember these TBC characters. There's always somebody, and if it's a CA or QS, sorry for the shameless plug, we are available. Make sure it's operated correctly. It doesn't have to be contractual if everybody's on board. The rules are there to protect both parties. It's not meant to be a stick to beat the contractor over the head with. Work collaboratively to avoid disputes. It can be seen that the contract is adversarial. It isn't. I'll go back to what I just said, that it's there, the set of rules and guidelines to protect both parties, and if everybody's on board with that, it doesn't need to be adversarial at all. Again, just to recap on what I said earlier about the supplementary provisions box in the JCT, there is one there that talks about collaborative working, so if you have said that applies, then obviously you're encouraged to follow it. And then manage the contract to completion. It's not over until it's over, and if you're on a project these days with Building Safety Act provisions, then you're living with it for 15 years one way or another. It's not just a case of get it over the line with a PC certificate. If there's a latent defect there and there's a building safety regulator there, it could be as long as 15 years, but more often than not, it's somewhere between 6 and 12, depending on the way you set the contract up. That brings us to the end of the talk. Thank you for listening, and any questions?
Thank you.
Could you just restate the importance of stating the CDPs correctly in the cycle?
Well, ultimately, like to talk about the entire agreement clause. If it's not in the contract, it doesn't exist. So the example that Dave gave, it wasn't just that the CDP wasn't put in that particular contract for that block of flats. The architect's drawings and the engineer's drawings said that all the timber frame was the contractor's design. The form of contract didn't even allow any design. It was one of those contracts that was purely traditional contract. It didn't even allow contractor's design in it. So it's important, and it's not just important that with the entire agreement thing. If you have agreed something, people often go on their merry way that they did agree it. But it's important that when you are entering into contracts, everyone understands. You're both on the same page on who's doing what, or you start on site and suddenly there's a gap there. So it's important to, often we see now, a CDP schedule. So when we're putting technical docs together, we'll say to the client side team, please advise of any sort of CDP elements, and you might get a list from the architect, a couple of things from the structural engineer, the M&E, and if you put that into a CDP schedule and then even have some additional notes, because it's never completely black or white, that there might be the structural frame is by the employer, but connections are by the contractor, so you can have responsibility matrix to make it really clear, and that CDP schedule can be in the contract, making it clear to everyone who's doing what.
So the importance is that the CDPs need to be accurately stated for what they are.
Yeah. I actually like the responsibility matrix, even if it's not CDP, because there can be things, that the client wants to supply the sanitary ware, and the responsibility matrix can be supply, but there are other obligations in there. Who's unpacking it, checking it for damage? Who's distributing it if the supplier's dumping it on the curbside? So I quite like the response. It takes a little bit of head scratching, making sure that if everyone's clear who's doing what, then you're not going to be having disputes when you're on site and everyone's busy trying to get things built. Sorry, go for it.
Yeah, so JCT versus NEC. As you mentioned, public sector particularly, they tend to use them more and more, but have you seen any trend favouring NEC in private sector projects lately? I mean, having worked with NEC, it seems like the language is more concise. There's the early warning system that seems to work well. But have you seen any trend lately favouring NEC in private sector?
The trend I've seen is that once you've operated a few NEC contracts, people would like to go back to JCT.
Right.
My personal opinion is it's very good in theory, but it's quite hard to operate.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think, going back to the extensions of time and having lots of period to review it, there isn't really that time in the NEC. You've got to agree costs and time on each compensation event, and it can actually distract from the building work because it's very process driven.
Small regions.
It's very administrative heavy. We do a little bit of marine work. They still like using NEC, and we have another private sector client who was preferred NEC, but we are actually moving a bit away from that. Like I say, it's very good in theory, but the simple language, again, it's very simple. It's very helpful for the layperson operating it because you understand it. But it goes back to the point about the JCT, particular terms like best endeavours and they've been defined in the courts. So
yes, it's easier to test.
Yeah, there are reasons that there are particular sort of terms used which might seem a bit archaic, but it's clear for people what that means. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ben and Dave, for that. Obviously, it's quite a vast subject. We've experienced difficulties. I'm sure we all have experienced difficulties with contracts and the kind of minefield that can be. We've personally used Q2 and reached out to Dave, which is how we know him, so we can definitely recommend their services. We're going to bring the event to a close, so thank you very much for spending your time with us. We appreciate that. You're pretty busy guys and girls, and that you've got things to be going to. Just want to bring your attention to our podcast that we're doing, which is called Philosophy Informed. There's some blue cards on the table. Please take one. On the back, there's some information about the podcast. It's our way of giving back to the architects in our community. So we'll be featuring different people, different practices to bring to light what makes you as architects tick, to give you a voice to discuss topics and basically just the struggles that you have as well. And makes I think being architects, it's a calling, isn't it? You have a passion for the industry, so it's what makes you makes your work so fulfilling. So if you'd like to be on that, we've got about 30 architects already signed up to be featured. So there's the contact card, and if there'll be new episodes, so please get in touch if you'd like to be involved or if you'd like to sign up to listen to them. So this is, as I said, it's our first one that we've done. It's a new experience for us, but we want to do this kind of every quarter. So we're looking to do another one at the beginning of October. So we're looking to discuss any other topics. And so as a team, we kind of came up with a few topics. One of them was asbestos and toxic waste, planning and disposal. Another one, being Oxford, we have issues with planning because of conservation areas and issues of that. And also we've been doing quite a few projects with timber frames, SIPs and NBC, Lee's here from NBC. So we thought that'd be quite an interesting topic. So I don't know if you guys have got anything that you would like to discuss or hear about, but please get in contact with us if you've got any, or even if you want to present. We've had some great presenters today, so if you've got something that expertise or something you'd like to present on, then please get in contact with us. So finally, just want to say thank you again to Joel and Dave and Ben and for Sam as well for being up front and presenting. We really appreciate your time. Please give some feedback. It's really important to us. And we've got plenty of food left in the other room. Teas and coffee still available. And just want to wish you a safe journey onwards. And thank you very much for attending. and hope to see you soon.